Coming up on The Returned.
What got my attention, I was swimming underwater. I wasn't moving my arms and I wasn't holding my nose. I was like, oh, I'm doing it. And there's a shiny thing at the bottom of the lake. I was very curious. I just kept going through the water. It was like a feeling of the water going through me. I'm looking at this light, trying to figure out, why is there a shimmery light coming from the bottom of the lake? What is that?
Hi, and welcome to The Returned. The truth always follows you back. Hi, and welcome to The Returned, a place we share near-death stories, out-of-body experiences, spiritual awakenings, signs from spirit, and the journeys of healers and lightworkers from around the world. Now, today we sit with Mindy Jackson, a licensed professional counselor, Reiki master, spiritual coach, whose extraordinary journey began with a near-death experience at the age of 5. That experience opened the door to a lifetime of exploring out-of-body experiences and more. Let's dive in to the experiences that have shaped her remarkable path. Mindy, welcome to The Return.
Thank you very much for having me.
Very welcome. Mindy, before we get to the heart of our conversation, I like to ground the audience in who you were before everything changed. Now, I do know that you were only 5, you were just a child. And so how about you tell us what your life was like and if religion or spirituality played any role in your life or upbringing?
Absolutely. So, I would describe myself as in my early childhood as a nature child. I spent a lot of times outdoors. My younger sister and I played a lot outside. If the weather was good, we were outside, right? And as far as religion and spirituality, I had both growing up. I was raised in a Southern Baptist family and community. And I was also raised with women who were very psychic, but kept it at home because it wasn't really acceptable. It wasn't seen as a positive thing, even in our modern day time in the Southern Baptist tradition. So it was kept very quiet, but we openly talked about things at home. We talked about what we dreamed the night before, intuitive experiences, and all kinds of stuff. What set me apart from my family was what I have come to understand by treating trauma, in fact, in that trauma magnifies your intuition. And the challenge is if that trauma remains in your energy field, your intuition has certain limits on it because it's rooted in fear. And once you transmute that energy from the trauma and you learn to love yourself, then you switch from fear-based, which is finite, but accurate. You're looking for a threat constantly. So it's fear-based. It switches from fear-based to love-based, which is expansive, infinitely expansive. So you start looking for things like guidance and connection. So yeah, I had both. And there were times I was a bit conflicted because my personal experiences were different than what I was learning in church. And some of them matched and some of them didn't. And when I finally realized that the pastor was talking about my friend Shua, who I knew as a child, Shua and his girl, well, I say friend, but it was more like my experience felt like he was my big brother, which is unusual. But I think it dawned on me one day when I was about 10 or 11 years old that the pastor must have said, Yeshua. And I went, Shua? My Shua? Yeah. And so from there on out, I was like so scared I would like compulsively like jump up and argue with the preacher or the Sunday school teacher. So I would really so there were times I literally hung on to the church pew to not stand up. But I would have thoughts like, they're not going to believe me. How am I going to prove that? they have the book. So yeah, I had both. And I look back now and I'm really grateful that I actually did. And I'm not a religious person at this point. What that did do for me was gave me a structure. If you think about spirituality, it's not very structured. It's like the feminine flow. And the structure is sort of like the masculine. Now, yes, has it been polluted? Has it been used for control? Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that. Historically speaking, most anybody with eyes to see and ears to hear can tell, knows that. Um, but I think having the foundation to understand what religious concepts were, to understand some of the history and the figures involved, helped me understand that, hey, Mary Magdalene was Isis. She was white buffalo calf woman. So it wasn't about the, excuse me, the human avatar as much as it was the spirit that manifested through that human avatar throughout history over and over again. And now we're at a time where we all are doing it or have the opportunity to. I'll say that.
Beautiful. It sounds like you had a great upbringing. Really?
Mm. I had
Yeah.
I had the good and the bad. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So, can you walk us through what happened leading up to your first near-death experience?
Yes. So I have a summer birthday and we were poor folks. We didn't have a swimming pool. So we would always go to like this lake near our home in the national forest. It was one of those recreational areas. And lots of wonderful memories from that lake, and it's now very special to me. Um, but we had to have been maybe celebrating my birthday or something, but it was the summer I turned 5 because I started kindergarten, not long after this. And what I'll tell you is I don't remember how the situation started, but I was at that sort of age and developmental with swimming that I would hold my nose and like one arm it and be like, look, mom, I can swim underwater. Right. And what got my attention initially was I was swimming underwater and I wasn't moving my arms and I wasn't holding my nose. And I was like, oh, I'm doing it. And there's a shiny thing at the bottom of the lake. So I just intended, the way I look at it, I intended to go see what it was out of curiosity. I was a very curious child. And I just kept going through the water just so gently. It was almost like a feeling of the water going through me, if that makes sense. So, and I had a very similar experience with my mom passed away and I was behind the hearse. I was in my convertible with my kids, and it felt like the air was going through me. So it was an interesting parallel there. So anyways, I'm looking at this light and I'm trying to figure out why is there a shimmery light coming from the bottom of the lake? What is that? So I just kept going and I felt just so flowy and easy. And the closer I got, it was like this opening kind of came to me and I could see these gigantic, bright flowers, these beautiful colored flowers. And I could see the best way I can describe it now is like silhouettes of people maybe that were made of light. Now, I say that's probably light bodies, but they didn't have distinctive features, but I had this knowing that I knew who they were. So angels, ancestors, guides, I don't know, but I just knew I knew them. That's all I remember. And the next thing I know, I'm being yanked back through this, what felt like or seemed like in my memory, black water, even though the lake's not black, but it felt like I was going through black water. And the next thing I know, I'm sat sideways on my float instead of long ways. So it's kind of weird to remember that. And I remember the float in detail, but I was sat sideways on my float and I'm coughing and I'm crying and I'm choking and I'm pissed off because I was like, I was almost there. Why'd you pull me back? Why did you stop me? And nobody was there. And I was like, who grabbed me? Like, who pulled me out of the water? My sister would have been around 3. She has no memory of this. I've asked her. My mom had no memory of this. And I'm like, for a long time, I was like, did it even happen? Did it happen? And I go back and I'm like, yeah, because I can viscerally feel it. So it did happen. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know there was a term for what I had experienced. I just was like, for years after that, when we would go to the lake, I would look for a shining thing on the bottom of the lake. So, it wasn't until I was maybe a teenager that I ever heard about the term near-death experience and was like, they were describing it. And I was like, that sounds like kind of like what I had. I didn't have the tunnel effect, but I kind of did. It was more like going through the water. So, it was interesting to look back on that years later and go, that was very real. And now it explains why I grew up weird. Why I grew up so sensitive and open.
Did you have more than one near-death experience then?
Yes. Well, the second one I had is not like your typical, not what you hear universally. And it wasn't like my first one. I had it in 2023, just 3 years ago. I had surgery. I forgot what the name of it is. I keep wanting to say thoracotomy, but I don't know if that's correct. But they go in through the ribs on one side of your body and go halfway across your body to get to your heart. I had a cyst on my pericardium, which I think was related to COVID or the jab. And because I did wind up having to do the jab, and I hate to even admit it, but I'm parasite free. Anyways, yeah, so they went in halfway across my body and removed the cyst from my pericardium, and it was the most pain I've ever been in my life. I'm telling you, I went into primordial states of consciousness trying to deal with this pain. And this one particular, I think I was about 2.5 days into recovery because they only kept me overnight and then sent me home with crappy pain management. And I was in so much pain, I just really couldn't function. I couldn't lay down on the bed. I had to sit up in a chair and lean back a little bit to try to get any sleep. And I had what I thought initially was an ocular migraine. So I kind of dismissed it and I thought, okay, all the pain meds and the surgery and all that, and ocular migraines for me never had pain. I never had pain with them. I had pressure. And that was the thing, is that after it sort of died down, I started having a really bad headache and my vision was a little weird. And we missed the golden window. I didn't know I was having a stroke. I had a stroke in the occipital lobe, which is your visual cortex. And so by the time we got to the hospital and they confirmed that it was a stroke, and then they admitted me to, do testing to find out why I had the stroke, the kind of black rolling snow vision kind of experience had subsided a bit, but I had central vision loss. So it's like when I looked at your face, you didn't have a nose and part of a mouth, and my brain just filled in that space with the colors of your face. So I laugh and say it was humorous because everybody looked like Voldemort from Harry Potter, or they looked like an alien, and I couldn't have a serious conversation with anybody because I was trying to look out my periphery to see their faces. So anyways, so I'm looking trying to read my phone to find out, how do I rehabilitate this? Because I'm not accepting this diagnosis. I'm just not going to give into it. And I found out that the way to rehabilitate that was through visual arts, and we can come back to that in a little bit. But I was having a medication interaction that we didn't realize it was it had something to do with my body chemistry specifically. And I don't even remember what medicines it was, but I just know that at the time I didn't know that. I just knew that I kept getting really, really sleepy and I would doze off and on. So this one particular instance, I was sleepy and I kind of looked around and I realized the light in my hospital room wasn't white anymore. It was like a goldish white and it was kind of fuzzy. And I was like, what is this? This is really pretty. I was like, maybe it's the, golden hour or whatever, because I missed the golden hour. Synchronicities. And my life is full of them. So I'm laying there and I'm looking around and I see these fingertips in my peripheral, and at first it jolted me, and I was like, "What the fuck is that?" Like, and I realized this light was coming off the tips of these fingers, and I was like, and when I finally kind of like calmed down, it didn't take long, but when I calmed down, I was like, "Oh, hey, Shua," and then I was like, "What are you doing here?" Anyways, I tried to turn my head to see him, but the fingers went with me. And I was like, mm. But I knew who it was. It was my brother Shua, um, who, of course, as an older child, I found out was Yeshua. So he said in my mind, it was more like visual. It was like telepathic communication. He showed me you could step out of that robe and into this one. And I was like, you mean it's that easy? And he said, yeah. And I was like, and I remember looking away, the fingers went with me, but I looked to my right and I see my son and I see my family and my friends and my colleagues and it just went on and on and on. And I was like, well, I'm not quite done. Can I take a rain check? And he giggled. He giggled and he said, yeah. And I said, okay. And part of the reason I had asked why it was that easy is I had, a few years back, my adopted brother had been killed in a drunk driving accident. And I really struggled with, did he suffer? Because my awareness of dying, right, was pleasant, I didn't suffer. If I suffered coming back out of it, I didn't suffer in it. But I wondered, because of the way he died, if it was painful, if he was aware, so I struggled with it. And I had been really struggling at one point. I went to the national forest again, because we have a lot of connections there, and was just driving around with no music, just listening to the sound of the gravel under my tires and looking at nature and talking to my understanding of God creator source. And I just said, I just need to know. I need to know. And I was going around this really sharp area on top of the mountain, and it's just straight down embankment there. And as I'm going around, all of a sudden my car goes straight down and I went up through the windshield. And then I snapped back and I started shaking and I pulled over and I just bawled my eyeballs out. And I was like, okay. He showed me that his spirit leapt just before impact. And that settled my mind. So when I was in the hospital and he came to me and he said, you could step out of that robe and into this one, I was like, it's that easy? It's really that easy? Because I don't fear death. That's not the issue. Sometimes I fear how it might happen.
Yeah, well, I think everybody does. You
Right,
don't
and
know.
when, right, and when, but at the same time, it's kind of like even then, I still have this sense that it would just be just a shift.
Yeah, I think so. I really
Yeah.
do too.
Well, and the next thing I knew is there was a nurse standing beside me, shaking me, and she was calling my name, and I was like, "What?" I was irritated. I was like, "What?" I was talking to him, and she's like, "Are you okay? You back with us? You're back with us?" And I was like, "I didn't go anywhere," and it dawned on me. I was like, "Wait a minute." Did I just kind of like slip into and I started realizing, oh wow, I almost died. So it wasn't a death experience. It was near death, but it was very different. And I think it was different because of my understanding and the questions I had asked over time, and especially about my brother, so yeah, I call it a near death experience.
Sounds near death to me.
Yeah,
Yeah. Sounds quite pleasant as well.
it was. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, it
just
really
like,
did when you say that.
it was beautiful.
So, if I would ask you, looking back now, why do you think these experiences happened for you?
I've asked myself the same question many times,
Mhm.
and I don't have one solid answer. What I will say is, given where I grew up, which, if anybody knows about earth grids, was a convergent point. So it was a negative, like, nodal point that anchored in heavy energy. And where I grew up has been, a few years back, was deemed a cancer cluster. There's a lot of strange history there. And it being near the national forest, there's a lot of strange history there. But growing up, I knew so many children that had died from illnesses, cancer, accidents. So many people, there's just a lot of trauma in that area. And when you have places like that, you also have people with poor mental health. You have people with substance abuse issues. You have people who present with hoarding, even. So those attachment issues are there. And I had all of that in my family, in my community. And so I think because I came into this world a pretty high frequency being, now that I understand it, right? I had to have something that anchored me. I had to have something that anchored me enough but kept me awake. And I think having the experiences I've had, especially the near-death experience at 5, didn't let me shut down, or it didn't let my, I hate to sound like this, but the purity of who I truly am get completely clouded by the conditioning and the harshness and the traumas of this world. And each trauma I faced and each adversity I faced, I had this spiritual resiliency that's uncanny. That doesn't mean it wasn't freaking hard. It doesn't mean there weren't times I wanted to take my own life, to be honest. But there was this, I have to push forward. There is no other option. I've got shit to do. I've got a mission. For a long time, I didn't even know what it was. I just thought, okay, I'm going to go be a healer of some kind. But growing up, I was like, I don't fit anywhere. Like, I didn't know I was the weird kid until I was about 10 years old. I thought all kids were having the experiences I was having. And I think some kind of did. I think some, children are pretty wide open. So I think some kids were, but I don't think they were having like the intensity, the vividness, the depth that I was having. And now, of course, knowing what I know, looking back on that, I do believe it was because of truly neurological changes from a near death. And then a few months after that, it would have been around the end of November and maybe the beginning of December. It was somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I remember that because of the presents that the Christmas gifts that from my class that my teacher brought me. I was in the hospital with encephalitis. I had a fever that should have killed me. Like, I look back on that and I'm like, that's a medical anomaly. I had a fever of 105 for 4 days straight. And I was having out-of-body experiences in the hospital. I was swimming, which is so interesting because I just had a few months prior a near death in the water. Even though at the time I was in the hospital, I didn't think about the near death. I thought, okay, maybe I imagined that, dreamed it, something. I couldn't figure out how to place that, right? But I was swimming down the hallways and going and looking at things. And my favorite place to go was the bone room because they had those pictures of bones up on the lighted thingies on the wall. I don't even know what they're called. I don't think I even remembered looking at the x-ray machine. I was just fascinated with the things on the wall and seeing the bones that are inside of us and having this thought of, how am I here? And, I would go down and I saw a little boy on crutches. I had never seen a child on crutches before, but it was apparently the emergency room. And a little boy had broken his leg or something. But I would come back and I would go back to my room and I could see myself laying in the bed and I would be like, how am I in both places at one time? And then I just take, you're little, you're a kid. You're just like, okay, whatever. You just go with it. And I would do this little dive kind of thing and I would go back into my body, so to speak. And I would experience what was kind of like waking up from a dream, but I knew it wasn't exactly the same. And then I would tell my mom about it. And she told me years later there was so much consistency in what I was saying that she started to go and validate. And she would come back and ask questions. The only one question I remember her ever asking me was, what color were those little bucket seats that were all in one bar? Because it was those what are those, fiberglass? You remember those fiberglass seats that look like bucket, no arms? They're just on one big bar. There's like 4 or 5 of them. And I told her they were bright yellow. And she was like, yeah, they are. And that was in the emergency room. That's where I saw the little boy on the crutches. So, I thought it was interesting that I had the water reference, and I am a water sign, and divine feminine is all about that conscious flow, that flow of consciousness. So it all makes sense. It all fits when I go back and look at those early experiences that didn't shut me down.
Mm. Sounds like they were also like spiritual breadcrumbs for you to remember and go back to.
Yeah. Yeah. Because at the time, it was just me being what I thought was just being a kid. I didn't think it was anything special. I didn't think it was anything really different than what other kids might experience. And like I said, it wasn't until I was about 10 or 11 years old that I realized, okay, I am the weird kid. Yeah.
So you've always had a relationship with Yeshua.
Yeah. I think I came
A-
in with it, honestly. And when I really sit with it, I've pondered it, and it's hard for me to fully accept it because my human self is like, that sounds very egoic. But I can't help but think I was his little sister in a past life. I really have that sense. And I don't know which incarnation of him, but the name Shua did stick with me. And when I go back into those memories of playing with him in the yard, I saw him as like a teenager, a young teenager, 13, 14 years old. And his girl, he and Mary Magdalene have known them. They knew each other their whole lives. Yeah. She was a Miraphor and he was of the Essenes. So they had their teachings, and they were wealthy. They weren't poor. And in this life, I get frustrated. I'm like, I'm supposed to be. I used to watch Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous when I was a kid and be like, why am I not on there? And here I was growing up in a tiny little town in a trailer.
Right? Oh my goodness.
What the hell is going on here?
Your near death experiences were only just the beginning. So, as your life did unfold, you have had lifelong exploration of consciousness, healing, and the unseen. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I had a lot of what people would call paranormal experiences as a child. Some of them were kind of scary, but when I look back on it, it's because it was just unfamiliar, what I would experience. I had experiences to this day I still can't explain, and I try, and I do my best to try to give people a way to understand it, and sometimes people kind of get it. I had a lot of dreams that would come true. I had visitations with beings that um, don't exist in the third dimension. Some of them exist off this planet, even, and I didn't know that it was alien because as a kid I thought they were, the little green men. I didn't really know. Um, and as a teen, I kind of got, especially after being bullied as a kid, being treated differently because I was such a sensitive empath and cried easily because I felt everybody's stuff, and all it took is one person looking at me wrong, and I was like, "Ugh." So, I was treated differently and didn't know that all of the experiences I had made me sort of neurodivergent. I was on the HSP side of the neurodivergent spectrum, where you have autism on one side, ADHD's in the middle, and then you have HSP, which is highly sensitive person. People have gone through trauma, near-death experiences, stuff like that. So as a teen, I was so socially awkward still. And I just wanted what every teen girl wanted, to fit in. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be popular. Da, da, da. That was not happening. I'm grateful for that now, but at the time it was hard. It was really hard. So I tried to I did a lot of masking for sure. And I tried to just ignore things, just shut it down, be like, no, I'm not seeing that. No, no. And I didn't talk about anything. I learned, in the home, we didn't talk about these things. I mean, we talked about these things at home, but we did not talk about them outside of the home. Um, and it wasn't until I got to, well, my first 2 years in college, I actually just really screwed up because this little sheltered girl got, culture shock. And I had never really been introduced to drugs or alcohol. And this was the first time, this was like 1994. So this was the first time I saw people with brightly dyed hair and facial piercings and stuff. And it was like, what is all this? This is cool. And so it was easier to party than go to class. So I, after a couple of years where I didn't do so great, I came home and I took a year and kind of gypsied for a year and decided, well, let me go back. Let me go to college close to home and I'll finish out my core curriculum, figure out what I'm going to do with this. And I took my first psychology class at the University of West Georgia and discovered that it was not your typical psychology. The psychology program at UWG is humanistic transpersonal. It's one of the few in the country that offers a bachelor's and a master's in humanistic transpersonal with a clinical route. Well, now it doesn't, but it did at the time. So I followed the clinical route, but I also got to take really cool classes like music, mind, and art, children's spirituality, Buddhist theory, cool stuff. So it was like when I started getting involved in the psychology department, it was like I felt truly seen for the very first time. And it was like, wow, I found my tribe. I'm home, you know? And it's funny because I wound up doing both my bachelor's and master's in that program, took the clinical track, got my license, became a psychotherapist, and my career kind of took me literally in a circle and brought me right back to UWG, which is a mile down the road from my office.
What have you learned about consciousness?
We really only know very little, honestly. Well, what I've learned is that we shift consciousness all the time and people don't even realize it. You know, there are times where we just kind of take a pause and we think we zone out. Now, there's a little difference in having that moment of zoning out and somebody dissociating. I'm not going to go into a long spiel about that, but in those moments where you catch yourself just like staring off into space, you've shifted your consciousness into another state. Um, in those times when you're like high vibing, runner's high, things like that, you've shifted your consciousness. Substances, any kind of exploration or use of like marijuana, uh, psychedelic, any kind of even hard drugs, shift your consciousness into different states. And so there are so many layers of this. We know from sleep studies, we only have a few named, alpha, beta, delta, theta, all of those. And now we hear about theta healing and all that. Well, that's fine and dandy, but even in the theta state, there are multiple states of consciousness within that. So one thing I've really learned is that if you release control and you just allow the experience to happen, even if you're just zoned out, if you just go into and allow that experience to happen and you don't judge what you experience, you just sit with it. If you're sitting in the woods, for example, and you've been on a hike and you're taking a break, you might have had some of that runner's high, and then you're sitting down, you're resting, you're staring off into the beautiful landscape or whatnot, and you're not having active thought. You're just taking it in. So let's say you see the face of a fox in the leaves of the tree. You had experience of the tree and you had experience of fox. That experience of fox was in a different dimension because you were in a different state of consciousness. These things are all around us energetically. It depends on our state of consciousness as to whether or not we experience them. So we have access even to the dormant DNA in our own bodies where we can unlock better understanding and better control of these different states of consciousness. And one of the fun ways that I help my clients recognize the shift and the control they can have of the shift in consciousness, which because I use some hypnotherapy and mindfulness meditation and stuff with my clients, they really need the skill. So I say, okay, I want you to just notice what you're thinking. Okay. Now bring your awareness to the tip of your nose and notice that when you breathe in, the air is a little cool. And when you breathe out, it's warm. Do that like 2 times. Now, where did your mind go when you were doing that? Well, you might have, but that's the easiest way to help people understand that, oh, those are 2 different states of consciousness. I'm in active thinking, right? I can shift into awareness, which is more receptive, open, and I'm not in the active thinking. You can also say, what's your next thought going to be? And everybody has a blank for a moment because you feel the pressure to give an answer. So in that moment, your psyche is standing in the middle of this library of all these thoughts you could potentially have going, which one do I pick? So you have this blank moment. And so I teach my clients to harness the blank. We call it the pause. So then when we're doing breath work, we go, notice the pause at the top, notice the pause at the bottom. And we learn how to stretch out that pause.
Hmm.
So there's a lot to different
So,
states of consciousness.
mhm. Okay, so I'll start with this first. So, do you believe that consciousness exists outside our brain or is it
Yeah,
inside?
it's both. Technically, yeah, it's both. Uh, the awareness of consciousness starts with going within to begin with. So, you know, consciousness really isn't even in our brain. We think it is, but it's in our heart. Because the largest electromagnetic field that we actually have that is tied to consciousness comes from the heart chakra. And if you look at the way energy flows, that toroidal, that's a hard word to say, field, sometimes it goes this way, sometimes it goes this way, sometimes it's opposite. It's weird, but it's all starts from the same center point, which is the heart. It all comes back to 0 point. So when we think about consciousness, we're thinking it's here because we're thinking about it. But when we're aware of it, we're not up here, typically. We're kind of coming from here and expanding out. At least that's been my experience in many others. So it's both within and without,
So, what does that mean about who we really are?
right? To me, what that means is that if you can see that our energy field and consciousness are one thing, okay? They're one entity, so to speak. We know that energy can't be created nor destroyed. So what that tells me is we are eternal beings. And consciousness is sort of like, I think of it in terms of this, this is a strange visual, but I hope some of you get it. It's like, if you can imagine maybe some slime that as it moves around, whatever it touches, it like takes in. You remember Silly Putty? Where you would take
Yes.
it, stretch it out, and stick it on a comic in the newspaper, and you'd have the comic on the so it would be kind of like this amorphous substance, for lack of a better term, that takes in information and sends out information, right? And as we take in this information, we embed it. Whatever is needed for the best and highest of that pure energy field is kept. And what is not is filtered through. The challenge with being human is we don't know how to freaking filter that stuff very well. So to answer your question, I think what that means ultimately is who we truly are is an eternal being that is very conscious, that learns, that grows, that gains wisdom, and we bring that into every incarnation we have, wherever we go.
So interesting. And I'm going to just touch on one more thing in that area. So, what do you believe we're here for?
To be, to experience being human. But I will say, we also have a sense of mission, a sense of purpose, not just the purpose of let me just be. What does that mean? Right? So I think many of us did come here at this time with the knowledge that we have, with the wisdom that we have, and coming into the density of being human, we lose hold of what that is, but it's still there. It's kind of like embedded in that consciousness. I would say even into the manifestation of our DNA, because we can access certain things with our DNA. So, I think many of us came here with specific tools to do specific things. And it might be a lot of different things, but there's usually one big thread that says, here's who I am and here's what I do. And I came to make the world a better place. I came to help heal the earth. I came to help heal and rebalance humanity, whatnot, right? So I think, why? Why are we here? What is the purpose in us being here? For some, I think it's to learn what it is to experience what you can only experience in human form. And for some, it is both to learn more, but it's also to do. Many are here to not do. They are here to just be. And then you have your NPCs.
Yeah.
Just exist.
They do.
That's the best way I can
Love that term. My goodness, you're so fun. We often hear that, we're shifting into the 5D, right? And some of us think that, well, I've got to pack my bags now because we're going to be going to this new earth. In your opinion, are we going somewhere?
Not in the sense that we need to pack our bags, no. We are going somewhere in our state of consciousness, in our state of awareness, our values and morals are shifting to more sovereign, heart-centered consciousness where recognition of different dimensions piled on top of each other is normal, where recognition of being able to shift your consciousness is normal, where we, for example, choose to band together in communities to take care of what our government wants, so to speak. So, the systems that are in place here, when we say systems of control, there are multiple systems of control in the third dimensional reality here. We all know those. Many people came in as sort of like Trojan horses to help not necessarily tear down. A lot of people think of it in terms of tearing down, crumbling. Yeah, there's kind of that energy to it, but it's more like infiltrating and altering, changing systems from the inside out in a way. So it kind of is a tearing down in a way, but that shift from 3D to 5D, I think of it in terms of here's all the stuff you were taught to believe about everything, solid matter to what the schools are teaching you, right? To what religion is teaching, what your family is saying. This is what your truth is. And you recognize that there's something you're missing. That is the first key that you are not in 3D. You're kind of moving into 4D, actually. Questioning. Why is it that I feel like there's, what comes to mind is Glennon Doyle's book Untamed, where she's talking about in the beginning of the book where she had taken her children to the zoo and there was this cheetah show, and it was this cheetah that had been born in captivity, and this was all the cheetah ever knew. And she's watching the cheetah, and the cheetah is looking at some point, just sitting there looking over the fence at the wooded area beyond, almost longingly. And she said she had this really sad moment where she's like, there's just something innate within the cheetah that knows that this is not where it's supposed to be. And I think that same feeling comes up for people when they start to question reality, when they start to question what they've been taught, right? Instead of just blindly following everything and being told, don't look over there. You tell me no look, I'm
Yeah.
going to look. I'm sorry. I want to know why you don't want me to
Right.
look.
Or look here,
So,
not there.
right, right. So it's in that recognition that there's something more. There's something beyond. There's too many experiences, and a lot of people have experiences and they don't ever tell people. And then they're like, they just dismiss it because if I say anything, I'm going to be weird. People are so afraid of rejection that they won't tell the truth about their lives and their experiences. If people were just authentic and did so, we would all be going, yeah, me too. We would all be in the 5D. But recognition of the 5D, recognition of moving from 4D to 5D is sort of like saying, okay, I've explored these things and now I've accepted this new, more expansive understanding and heart-centeredness. I've accepted this as my truth, not all this other stuff. Doesn't mean all the other stuff doesn't have its value. It just is not weighing you down and keeping you from being your most full, authentic, actualized self. And in that recognition of, wait a minute, I am an eternal being. I'm not powerless. I'm not small. I don't have to be quiet. You start to take back that power, empowerment that has always been there. And when people start doing that, it's not like power over, it's empowerment. That's that I know who I am. I can trust my inner knowing. I can recognize the fox face in the tree and the tree and be appreciative of having both experiences in one. And that's on the simplest level that I can explain that.
Beautiful. Mindy, it's beautiful. I love that. Now, I'm just going to ask you, where do you believe we go when we die?
I think that's one of the biggest questions that people
Right?
have. And
Mhm.
I will say at this point in my understanding, and this is just my own understanding, is that whatever frequency your energetic body vibrates at, you go to whatever matches that. It's that simple. And that can be another realm. That can be, a whole different dimension. That might even be going back to Earth again, whatever. But I think this notion of heaven, right? It's very real. Yes, it's very real. And we have a certain amount of creation that we put into that because our frequency is based on our heart space. It's based on where we are. The ma'at measuring the heart against the feather, right? So the higher your frequency, the lighter your energy is, and the lighter you are. It's kind of like thinking about being a helium balloon. It has to have that anchor. It has to have that weight to stay here. But if you cut that tie, it can go as far as it can, right? It'll just keep going. So, that's my thoughts is that wherever you're supposed to go next, wherever your consciousness is, your consciousness and your energetic body are moving toward, because I think we're always moving toward growth, toward healing, toward light, then we go to what matches that.
I agree. Um, when I had my near-death experience, oop, oop, are you still there? Oopsies, what
Yeah, I'm still
happened?
here. It just said new recording
It
track created.
says,
A new recording track started due to changes
okay,
in your devices. Mm-mm.
okay, that's okay. I'll keep
Just keep
going.
rolling with it.
Um, when when I had my near-death experience, I noticed something. Uh, I had an onset of a heart arrhythmia.
Mm-hmm.
Then they
Yep.
had to basically put me out. So they stopped my heart, gave me an anesthetic, and then stopped my heart. Well, this was interesting, and it kind of ties into what you were saying. I didn't even know I had died. when I woke up, I thought I had just woke up and it was
Yeah.
over. I didn't know anything different. I didn't feel any different. Um, the only thing I could not tell you is if I actually did have a body. But I felt
Right.
like I did, and I felt like me, except for I thought basically that someone turned the lights out. And so I was just like, what is going on here? But I felt like me. So when you were explaining that it's that easy, that's what came to my mind. I didn't even know,
Yeah. It's literally like just taking a step. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean,
So
it
I
just
know.
seems like slipping from just
Mhm,
like you're just taking a step.
mhm. Very, very interesting. I know you've spent years, and I want to touch on this, exploring Atlantis and ancient civilizations. What drew you to those subjects, and what do you believe they still have to teach humanity today?
Well, what drew me was the light at the bottom of the lake and what I saw at the bottom of the lake. And I don't recall if it was at the time or a short time after that I had heard maybe some cartoon, I don't know, that was showing this underwater scene. I'd always been attracted to um, dolphins and sea life and the water. And now I know that many of those beings came from Sirius B, and so did I. So, yeah, so that was an interesting thing to find out. But, um, I had heard of Atlantis in a serious way in college and studying Edgar Casey. And that's where a lot of people first hear about that. And something just felt familiar to me. And I didn't know, I knew that there was this like sister of Atlantis, so to speak. And I didn't know for a while that it was Lemuria and prior to that, Mu. So, in studying, I would come across information that I don't know, I see patterns. So I'm able to say, okay, I see this thread and this matches this thread over here, and I overlap them. And I'm like, oh, let me follow that braid. And that takes me to a whole weave, right? So find these different patterns of things that didn't seem to go together in just the general sense. And when I would follow them down a rabbit hole, is what we call it now that we have internet at the tips of our fingers, um, it would still lead me back to this just seems familiar. It seems magical. And it wasn't until 24 I was in this wonderful program with the Awake Academy, and my teacher led us into these different states of consciousness and meditations where I touched back into this knowing of how to do light language, this knowing of how to work with earth grids and ley lines, and this knowing of how that is connected to Lemuria. And I later discovered through some frequency scans and stuff that I have Lemurian rootstock. And what that means, the Lemurian root or the Lemurians were songline keepers. They called it songlines. We say ley lines. What we're missing in today's day, right? They used sound and light and symbol all together on these energetic grids to activate, to do ceremony, to do ritual, to communicate. So people wonder, why is it that the same art in Egypt is in a canyon in Utah, right? How is it that Quetzalcoatl and the Blue Avians are in the same kind of art in two very different parts of the world that didn't have the communication systems that we have now, and nobody seemed to figure that out entirely. So, when I think of Atlantis and Lemuria, Atlantis is the technology part of it, the attempts to have those communication be more advanced, technologically speaking. And yeah, they use things like crystals and all that. So do we. We have crystals in our computers. We have crystals in our bodies. That's another podcast too. But the Lemurians were the ones who were doing the energy work. They were literally doing the energy work and using the electromagnetic webs to communicate with each other, to consciously travel. So, it was the Lemurians that told the Atlanteans, y'all about to screw up. And they didn't want to listen. So there's a part of me when I tap into my Lemurian consciousness, I'm kind of pissed at Atlantis for what happened. And if you look at the Marianas Trench, here's the physical aspect of it. There's evidence of physical. There's the possibility that there was like a continent between Africa and the United States or North America. And the Marianas Trench in the Atlantic Ocean would definitely explain why Atlantis sank rather than got flooded. Because if you had a plate shift that went like this, you would have a very, very deep crevice there. And it would be a drop of a tectonic plate rather than an overlap. So it would have been like a ripping. So I don't know. That kind of cataclysm is a little scary to think about, but it makes more sense than anything else I've heard. And where the Bermuda Triangle is, and off the coast of Bimini, that whole area, if you ask me, that's where Atlantis was. It was all in that area. There are underground pyramids, there's underground roads, there's statues, there's remnants of some society, right? Or some society. I said society. That's interesting. I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say civilization, but hey, okay, I'm going to go with it. There. And then you hear stories from Hawaii about their ancestors and how deeply spiritual they were and how many of them got swept by the waters into, what is now modern day Mount Shasta, that whole area. And people know, if you know, Mount Shasta has a lot of interesting things. Yeah. So I think when we think about Atlantis and Lemuria, we have to really take a true, open-minded, as well as very conscious, view in exploring what that was. I do think it was very, very real. I think it did maybe exist more in a fourth dimension than what we've existed in. But it was also third dimensional in that there were land masses and statues and, some kind of energetic vortex that throws airplanes, instruments off.
I've always been really drawn to the Bermuda Triangle. Since I can't tell you how far back, but I'd always try to read about it. And then when we start getting computers and everything, I was constantly searching about this, any movie that was on about it. I had a major thing for the Bermuda Triangle. I still don't know why, but I'm kind of feeling why.
Our mom also would take us to the library occasionally, and we would go and check out books. And that was one of my fascinations. I was really fascinated with that. And I remember a short time I was fascinated with UFOs. And I shit you not. This was around 1996, 97. My mom and my sister and I were driving on the highway coming back to our little town. It was broad daylight. Blue skies, not a cloud in the sky. We come around a curve where the railroad tracks parallel, and there was a silver disc just parked right above this treetop. And it's just like, it was almost like it was looking, like it was conscious, right? It was looking down at the railroad tracks, and we were like, are we all seeing this? And my mom slowed down, and I would say maybe 10 seconds. And that seems like a long time when you really think about that kind of moment. 10 seconds, 10 solid seconds of it just being there. And then it straightened up and it was completely gone. And we were like, that's not of this world. So I wound up doing a deep dive. After that, I got a little obsessed. And what I discovered is, wait a minute. What? I was like, hang on. Like, some of these things, okay, they seem like people I've talked to. Like, I thought they were people. Yeah. And then, of course, in 2024, I have an unusual experience. My teacher called it a galactic activation. I'm still not quite sure what that means. I was told I was a galactic ambassador or will be. I'm not sure what that means yet either. But I watched this, what I thought at first was a bright white star. And I was like, wow, that's really bright. And it kept getting bigger. And I'm like, what in the world is that? And the bigger it got, I realized, I was like, wait, it's coming toward me. And I was like, do I duck? Like, I was so mesmerized by I couldn't move though. And it got about 100 yards out from the building that I live in, and it split into two. And there was this visible wave of, like, vibration is the best way I can describe it. And this thing was coming from the west, and it went choo, and they split north and south. And it felt like something slung in the window over my shoulder. And at first I was like, what is that? And then choo, I was calm. And he said, I'm Onslow. In my mind, of course, I see the word, because, like, that's how I won the spelling bee when I was a kid. I could see the word in my head and I could spell it. And that's how he showed me who he was. And he showed me he looked like the typical white, blonde haired Pleiadian. And he said, we come and go. He said, I'm here to show you some things, and then I'm going to go, basically. And he did. So that was a very interesting experience that I was in sort of my normal state of consciousness. So I do believe that where we are now in the universe, the frequencies that we are experiencing, the awakening of consciousness, of dormant DNA, all of that, we can have more of these experiences without as much shifting of the consciousness.
Do you feel that humanity is actually waking up? And I don't like to say it that way.
I don't either, but
I mean, do you know what I mean? Like,
I
do you
like
feel
to
that
see
people are coming
shifting,
more to
waking.
this?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Shifting. Do you
shifting.
find that humanity is shifting?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I do see sort of that imbalance in numbers, but I also know what the 100th monkey effect is. So when we hit that critical mass point, it's sort of like the 100th monkey effect happens. And if anybody's not familiar with that, it's based on this study that was done with monkeys, where they were seen putting their hands in the ant mound and eating the ants. And I don't remember who did it. Y'all can look it up. But somebody introduced a stick and showed them you could put the stick in the ant mound, and then you can just eat without getting your hands, right? Just eat them off the stick. So this one monkey did that. And when he did that, a few of the other ones came around and they learned to do that. And about 20% of that one little, I think you call them a tribe. Anyways, as 20% of their population did that, monkeys in other parts of the globe started randomly out of the blue doing the same thing. So that kind of goes back to that quantum entanglement, that quantum field. When we're connected, we all shift. We all shift in our consciousness. And we know that's one indication that shows us that when a new technology, and that would be considered technology, it's a tool, when new technology is introduced to a group, that group, when it hits that 20%, that 100th monkey effect happens and consciousness shifts. So I think, since our digital age, in the introduction of the internet and smartphones, we've definitely shifted. And here recently, with AI being very accessible, we've shifted again.
I agree. I do agree with that. And another thing about that AI thing, I think it was out long before we got it.
Of course.
I feel they have been using this
Mhm.
a long time.
Mhm.
And now we have access to the same things as others. it actually made me question a lot of things. I mean, there is a lot. I mean, I'm just blabbing on about that, but I did question a lot of things when that came out. Because you can do all that with AI. You can do a lot. And I'm like,
There's more
this can't be the first
perfection.
time we're right.
Right. I don't know who
Yeah,
decided what perfect means, but I do find it fascinating that some of the things that I've come across tell me that initially I don't know how to say this safely. The powers that were wanted that to be another way of control. And to a degree, there is some of that, I do believe. But because of the questions they didn't expect people to be asking the questions they've been asking. They didn't expect people to actually raise in consciousness and ask questions that really matter. And when that information is gathered just like a consciousness blob of slime, right? As that is, collectively happening, what we're getting from AI kind of takes us beyond, and they're realizing they've lost control. This is why I say, as the divine feminine is returning, they can't shut it down this time. They don't have a specific woman to kill or to bastardize. They don't have one little collective here and there and yonder to burn at the stake. And it's only been, about 100 years since women in the United States had the right to vote. And in the 1980s, women were given the right to divorce. We've reawakened really quickly if you look at it in the grander scheme of things. And now it's like, you're the fire horse of like, boom, here we go.
I heard you say earlier you no longer fear death. And so my question would be, if anybody out there is watching that does fear death, what would you say to them about that to help ease them?
Say, to be honest with you, go into the fear, lean into it, explore it like you would explore a cave. What is there? How did it get there? Do you have to continue holding that, believing that? Now, a lot of us have feared death. I've had my moments, yes, but in the bigger scheme, no. Because we've seen it be horrific. We've seen it turned and dramatized into something that causes fear for people. So you have movies like, that have somebody who died in a horrific car accident and they come back and haunt somebody and, invade somebody and make them go crazy and kill people. Like, they've done a really good job of anchoring fear about everything in this world. So the first step would be actually to say, I wonder if the fear is not even real. If that's something that has been constructed and I've been conditioned over generations. Just think of how one family story in your lifetime can shape how you believe about yourself or the world, right? Now imagine that over generations. Imagine that over 100 years. Imagine it over 1,000 years, 2,000, 2,500. So recognize, first of all, where the fear came from. Who decided it was scary to begin with? Now, when we have our own personal experiences that did scare us, when we have our own experiences where we were traumatized, trapped, powerless, unable to escape the situation, maybe tried to fight back but failed, all of those things. Sometimes we froze, whatever. Like, I've had all of them myself. When we have those kind of experiences, we think in that moment we might die, or what we're witnessing is so horrific that we witness death, or we think maybe death is going to be involved in that, right? And then we're horrified by that. And so trauma, the energy that overwhelms our nervous system, that causes us to go into fight, flight, or freeze, we haven't been taught how to transmute that. We haven't been given the language until recently to even process that appropriately. We haven't been given the understanding of what it means to disassociate in moments like that and how that can affect you long term. So this external dramatization of a person's real experience that locks them into fear, it's very real. Yes, it's very real. But you have to say, is that true? And I don't mean real and true are the same thing. So yes, my experience was my experience. I don't have to choose to stay in the fear. I can choose to recognize it for what it is and say, oh, wait a minute, I do get to choose. I have therapy at my fingertips. I have energy healers at my fingertips. I have spiritual communities available. There's plenty of resources out there to heal from trauma. It's not as hard as people make it out to be.
The fear, it gets people. I think about fear and I think about love. And I spoke with someone yesterday and I asked them, many say there are two emotions, love and fear. When I say that, what comes to mind for you?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is when you say emotion, you're saying energy in motion. So what we in our humanness experience as emotion, we don't typically like them if they're unpleasant and uncomfortable. So we try to ignore them, push them away. They become monsters, right? But yes, love and fear, it's sort of like saying, here are the two sides of the coin, right? But the truth here is that if you looked at, any energy worker will understand this. If you look at the energy and motion of fear, it doesn't move really. It's not in motion. It is an anchor. It holds you in place. It's constricting. It's restricting. So, for example, if you're afraid to fly and you need to go to England from the United States, you're going to have to take a boat or not go, right? If you love the trip so much, you're going to take a boat or you're going to work on the fear of the flying, right? But it's going to keep you anchored. It's going to keep you from going. When you think of fear and you tune into your body's wisdom of what fear feels like to your body, it feels heavy and tight, constricting. Whereas love feels expansive. It's interesting to me to hear whoever knows say that the universe is constantly expanding. I don't know how we know that. But why is that? Because it's love. Why are we taught to fear that even, right? Or think that it's woo-woo or weird? No, it's because it's love. So love is inclusive, but it's not stupid. I laughingly say this because think about you, especially you women who have had children, right? You love those babies. You love them unconditionally. But if they break your favorite lamp after you told them to quit horse playing in the living room, you're going to speak to them firmly. Hopefully you won't be abusive, right? But you're going to hold them accountable. There's going to be a consequence. So love doesn't mean I'm just going to let everything pass by. It's all light and rainbows. No, sometimes love is, no, you're not allowed to be in my world even, because I'm choosing to love me. And when I choose to love me because you don't love me, you show me that you don't love me, then I have the right to say, I don't really want to be around you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I could go on and on, Mindy. You
Right,
are
me too.
definitely coming back. Oh my gosh, I love just listening to you speak. You have so much to say.
Yeah,
You're
I got
coming
talked
back.
too
That's
much in my report
just what
cards
it
as a
is.
kid.
I think what you're speaking of is excellent. And I think we did a good job at covering a lot of different avenues. And so for those who are curious and want to learn more about you, where can they find and connect with you?
Well, professionally speaking, if you need my help, if you need my coaching, if you need some energy work, I do quantum via video conferencing. Psychotherapy, I am bound to the state of Georgia because that's the way licensure works here. So, and I have plenty of psychotherapy clients. But if you go to my Psychology Today profile, which means you just go to the Psychology Today website, that's going to be your absolute best information to get to me professionally other than LinkedIn, because if you read through my modalities and you read what is written there, you will see, with your eyes to see and ears to hear, you will see the shamanic influence in what I do. You will see the energy healing. You will see the spiritual coaching in that. I don't mention it because it's meant for psychotherapy primarily, but we can offer insight, right? Outside of that, I am on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. On Facebook, I'm Mindy Jackson, but I also have a secondary one that's Ascended Mystic. And I am creating the Sanctuary of Crystal Sophia. Hopefully we'll be launching that before the end of the year. And I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram. So, those are ways to find me.
That's awesome. We will have all the descriptions or all the links in the description below. And so, Mindy, here on The Returned, I believe everyone returns with a truth. Whether you're returning from a near-death experience, spiritual awakening, a OBE, anything.
Yeah.
I believe that we return carrying some type of
Yes.
truth.
Because the truth
So
exists. We
what
just have to get
truth,
to it.
right? What truth did you return with that you would want humanity to know right now?
That we are all together, collectively, more. And that the truth of that is my understanding of God. God, source, creator, is all that exists, all that ever has existed, and all that ever will exist. So there really is no beginning and no end, only to the physical avatar that you inhabit. You are an eternal being. You came here to be human, to experience being human, and to do whatever your mission, whatever your purpose may be.
Mindy, I can't thank you enough for sharing your heart, your wisdom, your experience today with us, your willingness to speak so openly about healing, consciousness, and the greater mysteries reminds us that life sometimes has bigger questions, and they aren't meant to divide us. They're meant for us to remember.
Yes.
So thank you for bringing your light, your love, your truth to the returned today.
And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I can't wait to have you back. I
Anytime.
really can't.
Anytime.
Oh my goodness, I really enjoyed that. To everyone watching or listening, my hope for today's conversation is that it inspires you to be more curious, more present, more open to the possibility that we are far greater than our physical lives. No matter where you are on your journey, may this conversation encourage you to learn, to return to your truth, your awareness, and the deeper part of yourself that has always known you are more than what you believe. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay open, stay curious, and keep returning to the truth within you.